At around 11 p.m. on the evening of October 1st, 2003, 16-year-old Monica Carrasco went to bed at her aunt and uncle's house near Balmorhea, Texas. The next morning, Monica was gone, with only her nightgown and a Bible missing. 22 years later, Monica has never been found, and the family have very few answers. Hello, and welcome to Box in the Basement podcast. I'm your host, Arlene.
And I'm Leah.
In 1996, my world was shattered when my uncle Leon Laureles was shot execution style in a small town in Texas. To this day, his murder remains unsolved, and the pain of that injustice continues to haunt me, my family, and Leon's friends and coworkers. Here at Box in the Basement, we want to shed light on the overwhelming number of unsolved murders and disappearances here in Texas and beyond. We want to bring awareness to the lesser-known cases that got little to no attention in hopes that someone listening will come forward with any information, because we strongly believe all lives matter. Ultimately, we want to get justice for Leon and for all the victims whose cases are sitting, collecting dust in a box in a basement. Please note that this episode contains depictions of violence that some people may find disturbing. Listener discretion is advised.
2003 was marked by the coalition invasion of Iraq. SARS, a precursor to COVID, became an epidemic in China. Apple opened the iTunes music store. The space shuttle Columbia disintegrated during re-entry, killing all 7 astronauts aboard. And Elizabeth Smart was abducted from her family's home in Utah. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers beat the Oakland Raiders in the Super Bowl. My New Jersey Devils beat the Mighty Ducks for their 3rd Stanley Cup. The San Antonio Spurs beat the New Jersey Nets in the NBA Finals. And the Florida Marlins beat the New York Yankees in the World Series. Nelly, the now disgraced P. Diddy, and Murphy Lee topped the Billboard Hot 100 the week of October 1st with Shake Your Tail Feather. And Dierks Bentley was at the top of the Hot Country chart with What Was I Thinkin'? The Rundown was number 1 at the box office that week, and I'll be honest, I had to look that one up. I had no recollection of that movie whatsoever. Dwayne Johnson, Christopher Walken, and Rosario Dawson were in it. I just don't remember it at all. John Grisham's Bleachers was number 1 on the New York Times bestseller list for fiction, and Al Franken's Lies and the Lying Liars Who Tell Them topped the nonfiction list. Balmorhea, Texas is a small town in West Texas. We're talking a really small town. The population in 2023 was just 378. Just to put that in perspective, a Boeing 777-200 commercial airliner seats 440 people. So the entire town of Balmorhea could fit into a 777 with room to spare. In 2003, the population was just over 500, which incidentally would fit on a later model of the 777. One thing I thought was kind of interesting is that the name Balmorhea is actually an amalgamation of the surnames of the city's founders, Balcom, Morrow, and Ray. The big draw for the town is Balmorhea State Park, which is home to an incredible spring-fed swimming hole that is deep enough to allow scuba diving. It's about 2 hours and 45 minutes east of El Paso and 2 hours southwest of Midland.
Monica Carrasco was born on December 13, 1986, in West Texas to Ramon and Catherine Carrasco. And she was a happy child. In fact, her friends nicknamed her Happy Happy because she was so optimistic and had such a positive attitude. She loved her family and friends and was always quick to lend a helping hand when it was needed. At the time of her disappearance, she was a junior in Alpine High School in Alpine, Texas. She was a good student who loved school and never struggled with self-discipline in terms of her studies. Her mother said that she was known for carrying a dictionary around with her. Her favorite subject was science, and she wanted to go to Harvard and either become a lawyer or work for NASA. She loved to read, paint, bake, listen to music, and play basketball. She loved animals and was a vegetarian from a very young age. She was a Christian, and she enjoyed attending Bible study and reading the Bible on her own, and often volunteered at her church. On the outside, Monica was a happy, upbeat kid, but on the inside, she was struggling. Her father, Ramon, died in 2000 while undergoing treatment for cancer, and this caused Monica to spiral into depression. One interview I read mentioned that her father actually died in front of her, and that would indeed be extremely traumatizing to a kid. She also struggled with an eating disorder. If you do any research on this case on your own, you'll see a variety of diagnoses listed. But since we don't have access to Monica's medical records, we're keeping things pretty broad here. Over the course of 2003, Monica lost a significant amount of weight, which concerned her family and urged her mother to intervene. In the late summer of 2003, Monica's mother, Kathy, had her hospitalized in order to help manage both her mental health symptoms and her eating disorder, and this caused some stress on their relationship. When Monica was discharged from the hospital, she went to live with her aunt and uncle, who lived a few miles outside of Balmorhea. And I get that. Monica's mother wasn't overly concerned about the strain on their relationship. It was more than likely just an opportunity to take some space, to let things cool off, or even just for a change of scenery. It seems that Kathy, Monica's mom, was trying to find her a residential facility that specialized in eating disorders, and in the meantime, she'd stay with her aunt, uncle, and cousins.
And you know how it is. Kids, teenagers especially, sometimes take advice and help that comes from people who aren't their parents. Monica's Aunt Velma was a stay-at-home mom. She volunteered to help get Monica's eating on track and to make sure she was taking her meds. Plus, her aunt and uncle had 2 kids that were around Monica's age. It was actually a very practical, sensible solution here. It's important to note that Monica started seeing a psychiatrist in Odessa shortly before she disappeared. Her aunt and uncle took her to an appointment the day before she went missing, where she was told that she couldn't go back to school quite yet. She wasn't ready mentally or physically to handle that kind of stress yet. Her mother reported afterwards that this news took the wind out of Monica's sails. She was super depressed after that appointment. So Kathy arranged to meet up with her daughter in between her appointment and the Bible study she was scheduled to attend later that evening, just to check on her.
This was the evening of October 1st, 2003. Monica, her aunt, and her mother, Kathy, joined hands for a prayer at her uncle's business. Everyone brought Kathy up to speed on that day's psychiatric appointment, and then Monica and her aunt went to Bible study, and then home to get ready for bed. Kathy Carrasco was encouraged by the impromptu prayer circle. She felt like she and Monica were repairing their relationship and moving past the upheaval of the hospitalization. In later interviews, Monica's brother Juan recalled an odd phone conversation he had with her before bed that evening. She was saying strange things. Juan said at one point she claimed the birds outside were telling her she was Jesus. Juan asked her some more questions to try to figure out what was happening. And then she suddenly snapped out of it and resumed normal conversation. Monica went to her room at her aunt and uncle's house at around 11 p.m. Her cousins stayed up playing video games, but they checked on her at around 1:30 a.m., and Monica was asleep in bed. At some time between 6 and 7:30 a.m., reports differ, on October 2nd of 2003, someone in Monica's family, I'm not exactly sure who, went into Monica's room to wake her, and she was nowhere to be found. At first, alarm bells didn't ring. Monica was an avid runner, so from what I can ascertain from the articles and reports I've read, her family initially thought she may have gone for a run. Monica also liked to sit on the swing in her aunt's garden, and her Aunt Velma assumed that's where she was. But those hopes faded very quickly, as the family realized she hadn't brought her running shoes or typical running clothes with her to her aunt and uncle's house. The shoes she did have were still in the house, and nothing was missing from Monica's room except the pajamas she had been wearing the night before and her Bible. Monica was on medication, and that medication was left behind along with her other clothes, her purse, and her suitcase. There was a door that led to the outside in the room Monica was sleeping in, so it was assumed that's how she left. So now you have the prospect of a 16-year-old girl wandering the West Texas desert in nothing but a nightgown. Balmorhea is in a rural area anyway, but her aunt and uncle lived outside of town. The area around their house was surrounded by dirt, rocks, tumbleweed, cactus, and other things you'd expect to see in West Texas. Not somewhere you'd want to be walking around without shoes. There was no sign of foul play. Nothing had been disturbed, nobody had heard anything suspicious overnight, and there were no signs of forced entry from the outside into Monica's room. The door to the outside was unlocked.
Almost immediately, the family called police to report Monica missing and organized searches around the property where her aunt and uncle lived. Law enforcement quickly joined in and organized a formal search in the area around Monica's aunt and uncle's house. Monica's uncle was a justice of the peace, and he was able to pull some strings and drum up a ton of resources and support. Texas State Police, the Texas Rangers, Border Patrol, local corrections officers, and other county and state employees all participated in the search. Some skeletal remains and a purse were discovered in the spring of 2004 near Balmorhea, leading to another massive search effort, but these remains turned out to not belong to Monica. Numerous searches around the property and Reeves County in general, where Balmorhea is located, turned up nothing. Literally nothing. It was almost as if Monica just walked outside the house and disappeared. Law enforcement enlisted the help of search and recovery dogs. The family hired psychics, and her information has been shared on the Texas EquiSearch website, but I'm not sure if they've been actively involved in search or recovery efforts. The FBI eventually got involved, as Monica was a minor when she went missing, and the possibility that this was a kidnapping or at least an interstate matter was floated. Multiple searches in the months following her disappearance turned up nothing, though. No trace of Monica at all. No real answers to how and why she disappeared.
There are reports that 5 months before her disappearance, Monica was being harassed by a school bus driver. The family didn't get law enforcement involved, but it scared Monica enough that she never took the bus again. And because there was no police report, there isn't much information out there about this bus driver and about the harassment or anything else related to these incidents. I've also seen it mentioned in at least one article that Monica's uncle, with whom she was staying, failed a polygraph during the investigation. But to be honest, that doesn't mean much to me.
I've taken a polygraph before. I don't think it would be that difficult to fail one due to anxiety or fear or anger or annoyance or lack of sleep or anything else, especially not if the questions concerned your missing niece who disappeared from your own house.
So let's recap the timeline really quickly before we get into our thoughts on what happened. Monica, her aunt, and her mother met up at the uncle's business on the evening of October 1st, 2003. Sharing a prayer and some conversation. Monica returned to her aunt and uncle's house, where she got ready for bed. She went into her room at around 11 p.m., and someone in the family checked on her and saw her in her room at around 1:30 a.m. Sometime between 6 and 7:30 a.m. on October 2nd. Timelines different from article to article. Another family member went to wake up Monica and discovered she was missing. After a quick check around the property, the authorities were notified.
So what happened to Monica Carrasco? Law enforcement has addressed three main theories here. First is that she left her aunt and uncle's home voluntarily. And this actually covers two of the theories we're going to talk about. Monica was on medication, and one theory is that she became disoriented or started hallucinating at some point during the night and wandered off into the desert alone. I don't know exactly what meds Monica was on, but several sources do mention SSRIs for depression. I've had some pretty wild side effects from various SSRIs and SNRIs, but never disorientation or hallucinations. Usually it's stuff like dry mouth, upset stomach, headache, heartburn, insomnia, sleepiness, that kind of thing. But again, I don't have a full list of meds, and medications can affect different people in different ways.
I think part of what is driving that theory is the fact that she left in her nightgown with no shoes on and just her Bible. That doesn't seem like a totally conscious or rational choice.
I agree completely. But at the same time, straight up depression and anxiety can lead you to make weird choices too. No meds required. And before anyone says anything, I suffer from both depression and anxiety. I'm speaking from my own experience here and nothing else. In any case, Monica simply wandering off could have resulted in her falling and injuring herself, then subsequently dying of exposure in the arid landscape. In another article, I saw it mentioned that Monica suffered from hypoglycemia, so it's been speculated that she could have been disoriented or confused because of that. I don't know that she would have been able to wander off far enough in rough terrain so that she'd never be found in that case, though. And we did mention the weird conversation Monica had with her brother earlier that evening. It's possible she was suffering symptoms stemming from a psychiatric illness, or meds, or hypoglycemia, or some combination of the three. Again, could she have just wandered off, thinking she was somewhere or someone she wasn't? It's possible, but again, why was no trace of her ever found? On the other hand, it's also easy to forget just how remote and open that area of the state is. About a month before this recording, labs were able to confirm that remains found almost 10 years after Brandon Lawson went missing in the open fields of West Texas actually belonged to Brandon Lawson. And this area we're talking about near Balmorhea is even more remote and desolate than the stretch between San Angelo and Bront, where Brandon Lawson went missing. There's also the possibility that Monica wandered to the highway and was picked up by a passing driver. From there, any number of scenarios could have happened. Starting over, human trafficking, meeting up with a murderer, there's no telling. We've mentioned that Monica and her mom butted heads before her disappearance regarding her hospitalization and treatment for mental illness and an eating disorder, but according to Monica's family, this didn't seem to be a super serious disagreement. There was some tension, but nobody felt it was bad enough that Monica would just run away and start over, especially not without her medication and any of her personal belongings.
The other theory, based on Monica voluntarily leaving the house, centers on the idea that Monica may have left in order to meet up with someone she met online. I'm not sure how much credence to give this theory, to be honest. It was 2003. That was still solidly in the days of chat rooms and online message boards. I know police did believe this was a viable theory at the time, but we don't have any specifics as to any evidence, correspondence, or information that would lead them to this conclusion. Was this just an assumption that was made often in the early 2000s? Or did the cops have some solid info to go on? We don't know from the reports we've been able to get our hands on at this point.
This feels like the former to me. Oh, it's 2003. She's a teenager. Clearly, she wandered off barefoot and alone in the desert in order to meet some skeezy dude she met on a Netscape message board. And that was sarcasm, by the way. Look, I'm not saying it's totally outrageous. I just think perhaps there's some cultural bias in play here.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. Let's think about this logically. It's nighttime. She's living with her aunt and uncle outside of a tiny town in rough terrain. It's October, and nighttime in October in that part of the state would have been pretty chilly. I seriously doubt a 16-year-old would leave home in nothing but pajamas and carrying only a Bible to meet a guy from the internet. She would have just cut class or gone to meet him after school like a normal kid. Or she would have been fully dressed with shoes to sneak out and meet a guy. From all accounts, Monica was not the type of kid to do any of those things, which makes me even more skeptical of any theories that she left willingly that night. Even if she was going to walk out of the house voluntarily, for whatever reason, she would have taken 10 seconds to slip on some shoes before wandering out into the rocks and cactus. And let's not forget that she left her purse behind. I don't know of many 16-year-old girls who would go and meet up with a boy and not bring their purse with them.
Like, I've stomped out of the house to go for a walk plenty of times throughout my life. Anxiety, a fight, frustration, you name it. I've never walked out without shoes, or at least flip-flops. Again, that's not to say it couldn't happen. I just don't think that's the case here.
Now, if we're talking about some random internet guy coming to the house and abducting her, that's another story entirely. And again, I know this internet theory is something that law enforcement thought might be plausible, but I don't have the specific details that led them to consider this as a viable explanation. Was she on the internet a lot? Was she a member of message boards? Did she frequent chat rooms? Had she met someone from online previously? I don't know where this is coming from other than it was 2003 and she was 16. It could have just been a one-off though. She meets a bad guy. Somewhere along the line, this person finds out where she's living, and that's that. She was not at full strength at the time due to her medical issues, so it may have been easy for someone to overpower her.
I think it's feasible that if she was abducted, then it's just as likely that it was at the hands of someone she knew.
And to me, that's what makes sense. This is the middle of nowhere, so there probably weren't a ton of people aware of her exact location. The fact that it's assumed she exited through the door in her room and not the front door to the house further leads me to believe that an abductor most likely would have been someone known to her, or at least familiar with the layout of the house. This wasn't the days of Google Maps, where you could pull satellite photos of someone's house and zoom in close enough to see their pool floats.
If she was taken against her will, then it does make me wonder, did she yell or scream? Why didn't anyone hear her?
Remember, there were no signs of a struggle and no signs of forced entry. It very well could have been someone who got Monica to open the door to the outside on her own and then overpowered her and snatched her up. Or they could have come in through the interior door to the bedroom and left through the door to the outside. Again, Monica wasn't very big. She'd undergone recent weight loss, and she was barefoot in a nightgown. And it was in the middle of the night. And if it was someone she knew, she wouldn't have been expecting violence. This tends to be the theory I believe. She was abducted from the home, and I think it's likely her abductor was someone she knew. A friend, a family member, an ex. Someone who knew where she was.
It came up in several of the sources I used that Monica's Uncle Abel was a person of interest at one point. We mentioned earlier that he failed a polygraph, which doesn't mean much on its own. But when you consider that he lived in this remote area and worked for the water district in the region and knew the area very well, now that raises some questions, and it raised some questions with the family as well.
He was the one actually leading a lot of the searches, which is honestly what you do if you were trying to point people away from the thing that they're looking for, right? Nothing ever came of this particular lead, but it certainly called many of the searches into question and caused law enforcement to doubt the validity of Abel's side of the story. The rest of the family are unsure if Abel was involved. They are understandably reluctant to point fingers at another family member, especially since Abel passed away a few years ago. So, if he did have information or was involved, we will likely never know.
I'm on the same page as you. 16-year-old Monica Carrasco disappeared from her aunt and uncle's house outside of Balmorhea, Texas, sometime in the early morning hours of October 2nd, 2003. She's 5 foot 5 inches tall and weighs just over 100 pounds. She is Hispanic with dark hair that had red streaks in it at the time she went missing. She has brown eyes, pierced ears, dimples in both cheeks, a mole on her left cheek, and chickenpox scars on her forehead. She was wearing a beige nightgown, though some sources say she was also wearing teal shorts. She was likely carrying a large Bible with her when she went missing. Monica was on a strictly controlled diet and suffered from multiple medical conditions that required medication. If you have any information about the whereabouts or fate of Monica Carrasco, please contact the Reeves County Sheriff's Office at 432-445-4901 or the Polyclass Foundation at 1-800-587-4357.
We are excited to announce that we are now a part of the Darkcast Network.
Are you tired of hearing about the Ted Bundys and Jeffrey Dahmers on true crime podcasts? I thought so. We've got something just for you. I'm Pat.
And I'm Darcy, and we are the hosts of Pod of Terror, a true crime podcast that dives into lesser-known cases from around the world.
Grab a glass of wine and join us every Thursday as we discuss the most vile, despicable human beings on the planet.
It'll be a dark and twisted journey, so don't forget your drink. You're gonna need it.
We're looking forward to seeing you next Thursday.
So if you like what you hear, please do us a favor and subscribe, like, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, please share this episode so we can bring awareness to these lesser-known cases so we can reach more people in hopes that someone who may know something will come forward. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the podcast creators, host, and this podcast has a bigger purpose than just providing information and entertainment. The Homicide Victims Families Rights Act is a bipartisan bill that was signed into law by Congress in 2021, and we want to see it put into action. This law establishes a systematic process for reviewing case files related to cold case murders. The focus is on providing a mechanism for the families and friends of murder victims to request a formal review of such cases. I'd also like to ask that you sign my petition for my Uncle Leon Laurelis' case to be reopened and reviewed with fresh eyes. And you can find our petition on change.org by searching for Leon Laurelis. That's Laurele. Please follow and like our Facebook and Instagram pages for Box in the Basement and Justice for Leon Laurelis. I also have a GoFundMe page to hire an attorney to help me get a copy of his autopsy that I have been denied for 27 years. You can find the GoFundMe by searching for Leon Laurelis. That's Laureles. But to get his body exhumed, to search for evidence that was not collected the first time around. We and other families and friends need assistance with getting FOIA requests. It blows our minds that so many murders occurred from 1976 to 1997 in Brownwood, Texas, under the watch of the same investigators responsible for handling Leon's case. We're going to look at all the unsolved murders in Brownwood, and maybe even a few solved ones if it helps uncover what was happening in that era that left so many families devastated and a community living in fear. If you want to hear more about victim-focused, unsolved cases and get updates about what we know, also visit our website, justiceforleon.com. You can also join our email list to stay current on developments on Leon's case and other cases we cover as they happen. Thank you for joining us. Be kind. Later, Gators.